As the day quietly fades and stars begin to whisper above, welcome to Korean History Whispers. Tonight, we gently explore the heart and mind of Jung Mong-ju, a man whose loyalty would shake the very foundations of a kingdom.
While his final moments are etched in the annals of time,
tonight you will feel the weight of the choices that led him there. Close your eyes,
and let his whispered memories carry you to peaceful sleep. In the year 1337, when the kingdom of Goryeo trembled between old loyalties and new uncertainties, fate chose to weave another thread into history's tapestry. Jung Mong-ju entered this world bearing an omen that would echo through the centuries. Born to Jung and-gye and Lady Yi of Yanchen,
he carried upon his tiny shoulders a mysterious mark. 7 points of light arranged like the constellation that guided travelers through the darkest nights. The child's mother, Lady Yi, had dreamed strange dreams before his arrival.
She had seen herself cradling an orchid pot,
only to watch it shatter in her hands, the delicate petals scattering like promises on the wind. From this vision came his first name, Mong-ran, meaning dream of orchid. Yet destiny would reshape even his identity twice more. As if the very heavens knew this soul would need many forms to fulfill his purpose. When 9 winters had passed, another vision would visit Lady Yi. She witnessed a magnificent black dragon, sleek and powerful, ascending through the branches of their courtyard's pear tree, climbing toward heaven itself. That night, Jung Mong-ran became Mong-ryong, dream of dragon. The transformation felt inevitable, as if the universe itself whispered that ordinary names could never contain the fire burning within this extraordinary child. From his earliest years, Jung Mong-ju possessed a mind that blazed with intellectual fire. His family, though respected, had not produced high court officials for generations. This son would have to carve his own path through pure brilliance and relentless determination. At 20, he achieved what many considered impossible, passing the National Academy examination with distinction. 3 years later, in 1360, he claimed the ultimate prize, placing first in the civil service examination under examiners Kim Duk-bae and Han Bang-sin. The achievement sent shockwaves through the kingdom. Here was a young man from a modest family who had outshone the sons of the most powerful nobles in the land. Among his fellow graduates stood men who would shape history alongside him: Im Bak, Munich, Jiam, Yi Jan-shio, and Guakshu. These young scholars burned with a common vision of reforming their beloved kingdom, wielding brushes instead of swords, fighting for justice with wisdom instead of violence. Jung Mong-ju's talents extended far beyond scholarly pursuits. In 1364, when Jurchen forces threatened Goryeo's northern borders, he joined General Yi Seong-gye in a campaign that would forge a friendship destined to end in tragedy. Together, they crushed the Jurchen commanders Samseon and Sam-gye at Hwayu, proving that Jung Mong-ju was that rarest of men, equally deadly with sword and scroll. General Yi Seong-gye, already a legend among warriors, recognized something special in the young scholar, warrior. From that day forward, whenever Yi Seong-gye rode to war, he insisted Jung Mong-ju ride beside him. Their partnership seemed blessed by the heavens themselves. To brilliant minds working in perfect harmony for Goryeo's glory, neither could imagine how this brotherhood would one day shatter into deadly opposition. Jung Mong-ju's greatest contribution to his era lay not in military conquest but in the realm of ideas. When King Gongmin rebuilt the Siang-Yunwan Academy in 1367, Jung Mong-ju was appointed as a professor, transforming not only his own life, but the intellectual landscape of Korea itself. Neo-Confucianism had arrived in Goryeo like a gentle revolution, challenging centuries of Buddhist dominance and shamanistic traditions. When Jung Mong-ju lectured on the 4 books, his insight soared so far beyond conventional understanding that skeptics suspected he was inventing rather than interpreting. Then came vindication, when Hu Bingwen's authoritative commentary finally reached Goryeo from China. Scholars discovered that
Jung Mong-ju's understanding matched and sometimes
surpassed China's greatest masters. Even Yi Seong-gye, the acknowledged dean of Goryeo's intellectual elite, was forced to admit his former student had surpassed him. He is the ancestor of Eastern Neo-Confucianism, Yi Seong-gye declared, a statement that would echo through the centuries. Neo-Confucianism was never merely academic theory for Jung Mong-ju. He lived its principles with an intensity that shocked Goryeo society. When his parents died, he embraced the Chinese practice of 3-year mourning, performing daily rituals of remembrance, while other officials resumed duties after 100 days. King Gongmin, moved by such extraordinary devotion, erected an honorary gate in Jung Mong-ju's village. More importantly, Jung Mong-ju began teaching both nobles and commoners to establish family shrines and perform ancestor worship according to Neo-Confucian principles. His influence extended to the highest levels of government, where he marshaled opposition against Buddhist influences,
arguing that Buddhism corrupted human relationships
and undermined good governance. As Goryeo faced the collapse of the Yuan Dynasty and the rise of Ming China, the kingdom desperately needed skillful diplomats who could navigate treacherous international waters. Jung Mong-ju's combination of scholarly reputation, moral authority, and practical intelligence made him the obvious choice for these crucial missions. The historical records credit Jung Mong-ju with initiating Goryeo's relationship with the new Ming dynasty, recognizing that survival depended on aligning with China's new rulers, rather than clinging to the dying Yuan. His diplomatic successes would prove invaluable in the turbulent years ahead, as Goryeo struggled to maintain independence while satisfying a powerful neighbor's demands. But Jung Mong-ju could never have imagined that his greatest diplomatic challenge would not involve foreign powers at all. The most dangerous negotiations of his career would take place in the familiar halls of his own kingdom, with a man he had once called brother, in bold charms, the formidable General Yi Seong-gye. As the first phase of his remarkable career drew to a close, Jung Mong-ju had established himself as the most influential intellectual of his generation. He had mastered Neo-Confucian philosophy, reformed Goryeo's educational system, challenged Buddhist dominance, and proven himself in both scholarship and warfare. Yet beneath his triumphs lay growing awareness that his beloved kingdom was changing in ways that troubled his deepest convictions. The Neo-Confucian principles he had spent his life promoting emphasized loyalty, hierarchy, and the moral obligations binding ruler and subject. But what happened when those principles collided with the raw ambitions of powerful men? What price was too high to pay for loyalty? When the kingdom itself stood at a crossroads, which path led to honor, and which to destruction? These questions would define the next phase of Jung Mong-ju's journey. As the scholar, warrior discovered that his greatest battles lay not behind him, but ahead, in a confrontation that would test every principle he held sacred, and ultimately cost him everything he held dear. The young prodigy who had once dreamed of reforming his kingdom was about to learn that some reforms could only be purchased with blood, and some loyalties could only be proven through sacrifice. The winds of change swept through Goryeo like a gathering storm, carrying whispers of dynasties' end and empire's birth. As the Yuan dynasty crumbled in distant China, its death throes sent shock waves through every vassal kingdom. For Goryeo, which had served the Mongol overlords for nearly a century, the collapse meant more than political upheaval. It meant choosing sides in a battle that would determine not just survival, but the very identity of the Korean people. Jung Mong-ju found himself at the center of this maelstrom, his diplomatic skills more crucial than ever, as Goryeo's leaders struggled to navigate the treacherous waters between dying Yuan and rising Ming. The scholarly debates of the academy seemed like distant dreams compared to the life and death decisions that now demanded his attention every waking hour. The historical records paint Jung Mong-ju as the architect of Goryeo's pivot toward Ming China, recognizing with brilliant foresight that the kingdom's future lay not with the past, but with the ascending dragon of the new Chinese dynasty. His passionate arguments in court sessions convinced even the most conservative ministers that clinging to Yuan meant choosing death over difficult rebirth. In 1372, Jung Mong-ju embarked on the mission that would define his diplomatic legacy. As part of Hong Sabium's embassy to the Ming court, he carried more than tribute and formal documents. He bore the hopes of an entire kingdom balanced on the knife's edge between survival and annihilation. The young scholar who had once dreamed of academic glory, now found himself negotiating the very existence of his homeland. The Ming emperor received Goryeo's submission with calculated satisfaction. But Jung Mong-ju recognized that this was merely the beginning of a complex relationship. The new dynasty demanded not just political allegiance but cultural submission, expecting its vassals to adopt Chinese customs and values with enthusiasm that bordered on self-erasure. Jung Mong-ju walked this diplomatic tightrope with masterful skill, offering enough compliance to satisfy Ming demands while preserving enough Korean identity to maintain his kingdom's soul. His success in these negotiations established Jung Mong-ju as Goryeo's most trusted diplomatic asset. When crises arose, when misunderstandings threatened to escalate into conflicts that could destroy the kingdom, the court turned automatically to the scholar, diplomat, whose reputation preceded him into every Chinese hall of power. Yet Jung Mong-ju's diplomatic triumphs extended far beyond the Chinese mainland. When Japanese piracy threatened Goryeo's coasts and the kingdom's very survival seemed to hang by a thread, King Yu dispatched his most skilled negotiator to the island nation. In 1377, Jung Mong-ju sailed across dangerous waters to confront a challenge that had baffled Korean diplomats for decades. The Japanese court received him with curiosity mixed with skepticism. Here was a Korean scholar claiming he could solve through words what armies had failed to accomplish through force. But Jung Mong-ju possessed something his predecessors had lacked: a deep understanding of Japanese culture, and an ability to frame Goryeo's needs in terms that Japanese leaders could not only understand but embrace. He spoke to Japanese Buddhist monks in their own philosophical language, weaving Neo-Confucian principles with Buddhist compassion to create arguments for peace that resonated in hearts previously hardened by generations of conflict. He negotiated with Japanese political leaders using practical considerations of trade and mutual benefit, demonstrating how piracy ultimately harmed Japanese interests as much as Korean ones. The mission succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Jung Mong-ju returned not only with promises of cooperation against piracy but with hundreds of Korean captives liberated from slavery. His literary skills had so impressed Japanese intellectuals that they composed poems in his honor, while his diplomatic acumen earned grudging respect from even the most hardened military commanders. Throughout these diplomatic triumphs, Jung Mong-ju maintained his close relationship with General Yi Seong-gye, the military hero whose star continued to rise with each successful campaign. The two men seemed perfectly complementary, Jung Mong-ju wielding words and wisdom, while Yi Seong-gye commanded armies and inspired soldiers. Together, they represented the best hope for Goryeo's renewal and survival, but beneath the surface of their friendship, subtle tensions were beginning to emerge. Jung Mong-ju's diplomatic successes had convinced him that Goryeo could navigate the changing world while preserving its essential character and dynasty continuity. He believed in reform through evolution, in strengthening the kingdom without destroying its foundation. Yi Seong-gye, however, witnessed daily the corruption and incompetence that plagued Goryeo's government. His military campaigns revealed the depth of the kingdom's problems: incompetent generals appointed through favoritism, soldiers unpaid and unmotivated, strategic decisions made by politicians who had never seen battle. The warrior began to believe that gentle reform could never cure diseases so deeply rooted in the kingdom's very structure. These philosophical differences remained largely unspoken during the early years of their relationship, masked by mutual respect and shared commitment to Goryeo's welfare. But as the kingdom faced increasingly severe challenges,
The fundamental disagreement between evolutionary reform and revolutionary change would transform two friends into deadly enemies. As the 1380s unfolded, Jung Mong-ju found himself increasingly burdened by the impossible demands of maintaining Goryeo's independence, while satisfying Ming China's growing appetite for tribute and submission. The new dynasty's demands seemed to escalate with each passing year: more tribute, greater deference, deeper integration into the Chinese world order. Each diplomatic mission became a delicate balancing act between preserving Korean dignity and preventing Chinese intervention. Jung Mong-ju's reputation as a skilled negotiator made him indispensable, but it also made him the target of criticism from both sides. Korean traditionalists accused him of selling their independence too cheaply, while Chinese officials suspected him of harboring rebellious intentions beneath his diplomatic courtesy. The weight of these responsibilities aged Jung Mong-ju visibly. The young scholar who had once approached every challenge with intellectual excitement now bore the heavy burden of a kingdom's survival on his shoulders. His conversations with Yi Seong-gye became more frequent and more intense. To patriots struggling to find a path forward through an increasingly dangerous landscape. Yet even as external pressures mounted, internal conflicts within Goryeo were reaching a boiling point. The corruption that Yi Seong-gye witnessed in the military was matched by incompetence and self-interest in the civilian government. Jung Mong-ju's diplomatic successes could not mask the reality that Goryeo was rotting from within. Weakened by the very officials who should have been its strength, the stage was being set for the most momentous decision in Korean history. A choice between gradual reform and revolutionary change that would transform two allies into mortal enemies. Jung Mong-ju's unwavering loyalty to the Goryeo Dynasty would soon collide with Yi Seong-gye's growing conviction that only radical transformation could save the Korean people from destruction. The scholar, diplomat who had negotiated with emperors and convinced pirates to abandon their violent ways was about to face his greatest challenge: convincing his closest friend and ally that some principles were worth more than practical success, that some loyalties transcended even the survival of the kingdom itself. The man who had spent his life building bridges between cultures and nations would soon discover that some chasms could not be bridged by even the most eloquent words or the most skillful diplomacy. The final test of Jung Mong-ju's character lay ahead, when all his wisdom and all his loyalty would prove insufficient to prevent the tragedy that history had already written in the stars. The year 1388 marked the point of no return for both kingdoms and friendships. When King Yu ordered General Yi Seong-gye to lead an expedition against Ming China, the veteran warrior faced an impossible choice between loyalty and wisdom. At Wewedo Island, with his army poised to cross into Chinese territory, Yi Seong-gye made the decision that would echo through the centuries. He turned back. The reversal sent shockwaves through Goryeo's capital. Some called it treason, others hailed it as salvation from a suicidal war. Jung Mong-ju found himself caught between his diplomatic understanding of Ming China's overwhelming power and his deep-seated loyalty to the royal command structure. The scholar who had spent years negotiating with Chinese officials knew better than anyone that attacking the Ming meant national suicide. Yet something in Yi Seong-gye's unilateral action troubled Jung Mong-ju's sense of proper order. The general had saved the kingdom from certain destruction, but he had also shattered the fundamental principle that subjects obeyed their rulers, regardless of personal judgment. This was not reform but revolution. Not evolution but rupture with everything Jung Mong-ju held sacred about legitimate governance. The aftermath of Wewedo brought rapid changes that left Jung Mong-ju's head spinning. King Yu was deposed. His young son Chang briefly held the throne, and then King Gonyang ascended to power with Yi Seong-gye's backing. Each transition brought Jung Mong-ju face to face with an uncomfortable reality: his friend had become a kingmaker, wielding power that transcended traditional boundaries between military and civilian authority. Initially, Jung Mong-ju supported these changes,
recognizing that Goryeo needed strong leadership to navigate the crisis. He even participated in King Gonyang's elevation, believing that stability required accepting Yi Seong-gye's political dominance. The two men maintained their public friendship, but private conversations grew increasingly strained as Jung Mong-ju began to sense that Yi Seong-gye's ambitions extended far beyond saving the kingdom. The scholar, diplomat who had spent his career working within established systems found himself confronting a new reality where power flowed not from legitimate succession but from military strata. Yi Seong-gye's supporters spoke openly of fundamental transformation, of sweeping away the corrupt remnants of the old order to build something entirely new. The breaking point came when Yi Seong-gye's faction launched systematic attacks against the old intellectual establishment. Yi Seong-gye, Jung Mong-ju's former mentor and the acknowledged leader of Neo-Confucian scholarship, found himself accused of treason for his role in supporting previous kings. Other scholars who had worked alongside Jung Mong-ju for decades faced similar charges, their careers and lives hanging by the thread of political expediency. Jung Mong-ju recognized this campaign for what it truly was. Not justice but vengeance, not reform but purge. The Neo-Confucian principles he had spent his life promoting taught that good government required virtuous scholars to guide rulers toward righteousness. Yi Seong-gye's supporters seemed determined to eliminate anyone who might challenge their vision of revolutionary change. Standing before King Gonyang, Jung Mong-ju made his choice. He defended Yi Seong with passionate eloquence, arguing that scholarship and wisdom should be cherished rather than persecuted. He reminded the court that civilized governance required debate and discussion, not the silencing of dissenting voices. His defense extended beyond personal loyalty to encompass fundamental questions about the kind of kingdom Goryeo should become. The speech marked Jung Mong-ju's transformation from cautious supporter to open opponent of Yi Seong-gye's faction. The friendship that had survived military campaigns and diplomatic crises finally shattered on the rocks of irreconcilable principles. Two men who had once shared dreams of reforming their kingdom now stood on opposite sides of an unbridgeable chasm. By 1392, Jung Mong-ju had concluded that only direct action could save the Goryeo Dynasty from Yi Seong-gye's revolutionary ambitions. The general's recent injury from a fall provided an unexpected opportunity, a moment of vulnerability that might never come again. Jung Mong-ju gathered his most trusted supporters, Kim Jin-young, Yirwak, Yiri, Guanhong, and Yu Jie. Men who shared his commitment to dynastic legitimacy over political expedience. Their plan was audacious in its simplicity. Impeach Yi Seong-gye's key supporters while the general himself was incapacitated. Then eliminate the entire faction before they could recover their balance. Jung Mong-ju knew the risks were enormous, but he had concluded that gradual resistance was futile against opponents willing to use any means necessary to achieve their goals. The conspiracy revealed the depth of Jung Mong-ju's transformation from diplomatic moderate to desperate loyalist. The man who had spent his career building consensus and finding middle ground was now prepared to stake everything on a single, violent gamble. His Neo-Confucian principles taught that legitimate authority must be preserved against usurpers, even at the cost of civil war and personal destruction. The conspiracy collapsed before it could begin. Yi Seong-gye, the future King Taegyang, had anticipated Jung Mong-ju's desperation and prepared countermeasures that neutralized the threat before it could develop. But rather than immediately moving against his father's former friend, the younger Yi chose a different approach. One final attempt at reconciliation. The meeting between Jung Mong-ju and Yi Seong-gye carried the weight of decades of shared history and mutual respect. Two old friends sat across from each other in a traditional reception hall, their conversation flowing around subjects both momentous and trivial, each man perhaps hoping to find some path back from the brink of irreversible conflict. Yi Seong-gye spoke of practical necessities, of the corruption that had made revolutionary change inevitable,
of the opportunities that awaited talented men in a new dynasty. He offered Jung Mong-ju a position, respect, and the chance to help build the reformed kingdom they had once dreamed of creating together. The general's words carried genuine affection for his former comrade, along with implicit warning about the consequences of continued resistance. Jung Mong-ju listened with the courtesy of a lifetime diplomat, but his response carried the finality of absolute conviction. He spoke of loyalty that transcended personal advantage, of principles that could not be compromised regardless of practical benefits. His famous poem would later capture the essence of his position. A heart that would choose death 100 times rather than betray the trust placed in him by legitimate authority. The conversation ended with both men understanding that reconciliation was impossible. They parted with formal politeness, masking the knowledge that one of them would soon be dead. Jung Mong-ju had chosen his path with full awareness of its destination, embracing martyrdom as the only response consistent with his deepest convictions. As he left that final meeting, Jung Mong-ju carried himself with the dignity of a man at peace with his destiny. The scholar who had once dreamed of reforming his kingdom through gradual change had discovered that some principles demanded ultimate sacrifice. The boy marked by 7 stars was approaching the moment when his fate would be sealed not by the choices of others, but by his own unwavering commitment to loyalty beyond reason, beyond hope, beyond life itself. The bridge that would bear his blood was waiting, and with it, immortality. The stone bridge called Seonjuk stretched across the gentle stream like a pathway between two worlds, the world of the living, where compromise and survival mattered, and the world of eternal principles, where honor transcended breath itself. Jung Mong-ju crossed that bridge on an April evening in 1392. His footsteps echoing with the finality of a man who had already chosen his destination. Behind him lay the meeting with Yi Seong-gye. Their final conversation heavy with unspoken farewells. Ahead waited the darkness where Seonjuk, and Goryeo lurked with weapons drawn, servants of a future that required the silencing of the past. Jung Mong-ju walked steadily forward, neither hastening nor delaying, a scholar keeping his final appointment with history. The attack came swift and merciless. Iron clubs rose and fell in the spring twilight, crushing the body that had carried such brilliant thoughts and unwavering convictions across 55 years of extraordinary life. Jung Mong-ju fell upon the stone bridge, his blood seeping into the ancient masonry, marking the spot where the last defender of Goryeo's legitimacy made his ultimate sacrifice. Legend claims that where his blood touched the stone, red bamboo sprouted and grew, as if the earth itself mourned the passing of such rare loyalty. Whether true or not, the story captured something essential about Jung Mong-ju's death. It was both ending and beginning. Destruction that created something imperishable. With Jung Mong-ju's death, the last intellectual resistance to Yi Seong-gye's revolutionary vision crumbled like autumn leaves. His supporters fled into exile or submission, understanding that further resistance would only bring more bloodshed without hope of success. The Neo-Confucian scholars who had once dreamed of reforming Goryeo through gradual change now faced a stark choice: serve the new order or disappear into obscurity. 3 months after Jung Mong-ju's assassination, King Gun formally abdicated the throne that had passed through his family for nearly 5 centuries. The ceremony was conducted with all the pomp and dignity that tradition demanded. But everyone present understood they were witnessing not just a change of rulers, but the death of a world. Yi Seong-gye accepted the crown and proclaimed the Joseon Dynasty, taking the reign named Taiyeo, and declaring his intention to build a new Korea on the ruins of the old. The kingdom that Jung Mong-ju had died defending passed into history, its achievements and failures alike judged by the harsh tribunal of dynastic transition. Yet even as Goryeo breathed its last, something unexpected began to happen. The very brutality of Jung Mong-ju's death started to transform him from political opponent into moral symbol.
Whispered conversations in palace corridors and village squares began to speak, not of his failed conspiracy, but of his unwavering loyalty.
Not of his political miscalculations,
but of his refusal to compromise fundamental principles.
History's most bitter irony unfolded when Yi Seong-gye,
who had orchestrated Jung Mong-ju's assassination, ascended the throne as King Taejong. One of his first acts was to posthumously promote Jung Mong-ju to the highest ministerial rank, an honor that seemed to mock the very principles for which the scholar had died, but the gesture revealed something deeper than mere political calculation.
The new dynasty,
secure in its power, could afford to honor the loyalty of its former enemies.
More importantly, King Taejong recognized that
Joseon needed symbols of unwavering principle to legitimize its own authority. If subjects could abandon their loyalty to Goryeo, what would prevent them from abandoning Joseon when circumstances changed? The promotion came at the suggestion of Gwan-gun, one of Jung Mong-ju's former colleagues who had accepted service under the new dynasty. Gwan-gun argued that true loyalty deserved recognition regardless of its political target, that a kingdom's strength depended partly on citizens willing to die for their convictions, rather than live for their convenience. King Taejong's decree transformed Jung Mong-ju from dangerous rebel into noble martyr, from political obstacle into moral exemplar. The man who had failed to save his dynasty succeeded in creating something more enduring, an ideal of loyalty that would inspire Korean culture for centuries to come. Under King Sejong, Jung Mong-ju's rehabilitation reached full flower.
The great king, secure enough in Joseon's legitimacy
to celebrate even its former enemies, declared that Jung Mong-ju and Giljae should be honored as perfect examples of loyal subjects. The scholar who had been killed for opposing dynastic change was now praised as the embodiment of the very loyalty that Joseon demanded from its own subjects. Court scholars who had once feared to mention Jung Mong-ju's name now competed to praise his wisdom and moral courage. His Neo-Confucian teachings, which had been suppressed as politically dangerous, were rehabilitated as foundational texts for Korean intellectual development. The man who had died defending the past became a bridge to the future, his ideas shaping the dynasty that had destroyed him. King Sejong's courtiers no longer whispered about Jung Mong-ju's failed conspiracy, but celebrated his famous poem of absolute loyalty. The verses that had once seemed like dangerous defiance now sounded like noble principle, inspiring rather than threatening the established order. Political opponent had become cultural hero through the alchemy of time and selective memory. The final transformation was complete when the Saram scholars of the mid-Joseon period claimed Jung Mong-ju as their spiritual ancestor.
These Neo-Confucian
intellectuals,
who wielded enormous influence
over Korean culture and politics, traced their philosophical lineage directly back to the martyr of Seonjuk Bridge. 13 different academies were established to teach his ideas and honor his memory, creating an institutional legacy that far exceeded anything he had achieved during his lifetime. Jung Mong-ju's teachings spread throughout Korean society, shaping everything from government policy to family relationships. His emphasis on filial piety became a cornerstone of Korean culture, while his model of scholarly integrity inspired generations of intellectuals. The man who had failed to reform Goryeo succeeded in transforming Joseon through the power of posthumous moral authority. The Sunjang Seowan, established in Giseong near the site of his death, became the most important center for studying his philosophy. Students from across Korea traveled there to learn about the scholar who had chosen death over compromise, seeking to understand how principle could triumph over politics through the mystery of moral example. But perhaps Jung Mong-ju's greatest legacy lay in the bridge itself. Seonjuk Bridge became a pilgrimage site, a place where Koreans came to contemplate the relationship between loyalty and conscience, between practical wisdom and absolute principle. The red bamboo that allegedly grew from his spilled blood became a symbol of how true sacrifice could create beauty from tragedy.
meaning from meaninglessness.
The boy marked by 7 stars had indeed fulfilled his destiny,
though not in any way he could have imagined.
He had failed to save his king but had created a
standard of loyalty that would inspire subjects for centuries.
He had lost the political battle but had won the cultural war. His ideas shaping the very dynasty that had destroyed him. Jung Mong-ju discovered in death what had eluded him in life.
That some victories could only be achieved through defeat.
Some successes could only be purchased with failure. And some forms of immortality required the complete
sacrifice of mortal ambition. The scholar, warrior,
who had dreamed of reforming his kingdom through gradual change, had instead transformed
Korean civilization through the radical act of absolute loyalty. His whispered memories had become eternal voices.
His individual sacrifice had become universal inspiration, and his momentary death had become timeless life.
The 7 stars that had marked his birth now shone forever in the constellation of Korean culture,
guiding travelers through darkness just as his mother had dreamed so many years ago. Close your eyes,
and let these whispered memories carry you to peaceful sleep.